The handmade Italian leather shoe connected with Idra Solange's ribs with brutal precision. She slammed into the marble balustrade of the Loggia dei Mercanti, Renaissance-era tiles cracking beneath her as she hit the ground, her Valentino coat tearing, her wrists scraping against the ancient stone edge. For a heartbeat, the entire historic plaza froze in stunned silence. Idra looked up from the cold marble at the man towering over her, disgust carved into his angular features. Caspian Thorn, her ex-fiancé, the man who destroyed her life 5 years ago. "Crawl back to whatever gutter you came from, Idra," Caspian spat, his voice echoing off the vaulted arches. He had no idea who she'd become. No idea that the broken woman he remembered, the one who'd slept in her car with 20 euros to her name, who'd watched him steal her architectural blueprints and her future, who'd built herself back from absolute ruin, was gone. No idea about the platinum Moretti crest hidden beneath her, leather glove, the Lake Como villa she'd kissed her husband goodbye in that morning, or the architectural contract in her briefcase that could make or break empires. And Caspian definitely had no idea about the man whose last name she now carried, the man whose sentinels were already moving through the crowd like shadows, the man whose private line was vibrating in her clutch right now. Venezio von Moretti, her husband, Italy's most feared underground king. As Idra's bloodied fingers accepted the call and Venezio's lethal, controlled voice asked, "Amore, are you hurt?" She watched comprehension begin to dawn across Caspian's pale face. He just kicked the wrong woman. And in approximately 10 minutes, when Venezio's black convoy pulled into the loggia's sealed perimeter, Caspian Thorn was going to learn a lesson about power that would dismantle everything he'd ever built. But he didn't know it yet. Right now, in this frozen moment beneath Milan's ancient arches, he still believed she was nothing. That illusion was about to shatter. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. The morning sun bled gold across Lake Como's surface, turning the water into liquid amber as Idra Solange stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Moretti villa. She wore nothing but Venezio's white dress shirt, the fabric hanging to her thighs, her natural curls still sleep-tousled. Behind her, she could feel him watching, always watching, even before his arms slid around her waist with the practiced ease of a man who'd memorized every curve of her body. "You're thinking too loud, Bella," Venezio murmured against her neck, his voice still rough with sleep. His fingers traced the small scar on her wrist, the one she'd gotten the night she'd slept in her car 5 years ago, cold and broken. He touched it every morning like a prayer, like a reminder of the woman he'd almost never met. "The Loggia meeting," Idra said softly. "It's the Castellani contract. If I secure it, my firm moves from boutique to major league." She felt him tense behind her, his grip tightening imperceptibly. Venezio Moretti didn't do anything imperceptibly. Every movement was calculated, controlled, which meant he wanted her to feel his hesitation. "Osiris will drive you. Marco and Dante in the backup car." His breath was warm against her ear, but there was steel underneath the silk. Non-negotiable. Idra turned in his arms, meeting those dark eyes that had sentenced men to early graves and whispered love sonnets against her skin in the same night. At 43, Venezio wore power like a second skin. The silver threading through his black hair only made him more dangerous, more magnetic. The scar bisecting his left eyebrow was a souvenir from a turf war he'd ended with nothing but a dinner knife and absolute conviction. "Vain, it's a business meeting in a public plaza. I'll be fine. You said that about the charity gala in Venice." His jaw tightened. "That reporter got within 2 meters of you before Osiris intercepted him. 2 meters, Idra, that's close enough to—" She pressed, her fingers to his lips, feeling the tension thrumming through him like a live wire. This was the dance they did every morning she left the villa for work. Venezio, who controlled the Italian underworld with cold precision, who'd built an empire on calculated violence and absolute loyalty, became something else entirely when it came to her. Protective didn't cover it. Possessive was closer. Worshipful was most accurate. "I'm not the girl sleeping in her car anymore," she said gently. "I'm not her, and you're not going to lose me." Something flickered across his face. Vulnerability that he showed only to her, only in these stolen morning moments before he became the king of shadows again. He cupped her face with hands that had broken bones and built empires, thumbs stroking her cheekbones with devastating tenderness. "Amore mio, I found you broken in the rain outside my nightclub, trying to sketch buildings on wet napkins because you had nothing left but your dreams." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You looked at me like I was a man, not a monster. Do you understand what that did to me? What you do to me?" Idra's throat tightened. She remembered that night 3 years ago, desperate, destroyed, sketching her stolen blueprints from memory because they were all she had left of herself. Venezio had walked out of La Fenice to find her crying under the awning, had looked at her architectural drawings instead of her tears and said, "These are brilliant. Who stole them from you?" She told him everything. By sunrise, Venezio had offered her 2 things: a job as his personal architect redesigning his properties, and vengeance against Caspian Thorn. She'd taken the job. She'd refused the vengeance. "Let him fade into nothing," she'd said. "I want to build something he could never destroy." Venezio had fallen in love with her for that mercy, had married her 6 months later in a private ceremony that had half of Italy's underworld in attendance and the other half too terrified to crash. Now he pressed his forehead to hers. 3 bodyguards minimum. Osiris doesn't leave your side, and you keep your phone on. "Yes, mio re," she teased, calling him my king because it always made him smile. But he didn't smile. His eyes had gone distant, that predatory calculation sliding into place. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately. Not Osiris, me. Vain. Promise me, Idra." She kissed him instead of answering, tasting coffee and possessiveness and love so fierce it sometimes scared her. When she pulled back, she whispered, "I promise." He let her go then, but she felt his gaze tracking her as she moved toward their bedroom to dress. Felt it like a physical weight, like a shield, like a cage. Venezio's love was beautiful and suffocating in equal measure, and she'd learned to breathe within it. What Idra didn't know, as she selected her burgundy Valentino coat and patent leather boots as she reviewed the Castellani contract one final time, was that in exactly 2 hours she would break that promise, and Venezio would burn Milan to answer for it. The Loggia dei Mercanti rose before Idra like a cathedral to commerce and power, its Renaissance arches carved with the faces of forgotten merchants and saints. She stepped from the Moretti sedan into the crisp Milanese morning, her burgundy coat catching the light like spilled wine. Osiris Valli materialized at her elbow, 6'4" of silent menace wrapped in a tailored suit, his hand never far from the gun holstered beneath his jacket. "Signora Moretti," he said, his voice like gravel smoothed by expensive education. "The meeting room is on the 2nd floor. I'll be positioned outside the door." Idra nodded, adjusting the portfolio containing her architectural proposals. The Castellani family wanted to transform 3 historic buildings into luxury residences, and her design was bold, a fusion of old-world craftsmanship and contemporary sustainability that would either make her reputation or mark her as too ambitious for Milan's conservative elite. She needed this, not for money. Venezio had more wealth than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. She needed it to prove that Idra Solange Moretti existed on her own merit. that she was more than the favored wife of a king. As she crossed the plaza's geometric marble tiles, the morning crowd parting unconsciously around Osiris's intimidating presence, a memory crashed through her like breaking glass. 5 years ago, the same plaza. Idra had been 26, her portfolio tucked under her arm, her stomach empty because she'd chosen printing costs over breakfast. Again. She was meeting Caspian at Café Mercanti to celebrate. Her blueprints for the Riverside Cultural Center had just been shortlisted for the prestigious Giovanni Prize. 3 years of work, of late nights and borrowed resources finally validated. Caspian had kissed her at the cafe entrance, his smile perfect, his suit expensive in that effortless way that came from generational wealth. "Let me see them, babe. I want a toast to my brilliant fiancé." She'd handed him the portfolio without hesitation. Why wouldn't she? They'd been together for 4 years. He'd proposed with his grandmother's ring. He'd held her through panic attacks about money, about her student loans, about proving herself in a field dominated by men who looked nothing like her. He'd ordered champagne. They'd laughed. And when she'd gone to the restroom, he'd photographed every single page of her blueprints. The memory dissolved as Idra's heels clicked against the marble, but the phantom ache remained. She'd learned the truth 3 weeks later when the Giovanni Prize Committee had contacted her about plagiarism concerns. Someone had submitted designs nearly identical to hers, Caspian Thorn under his architectural firm's letterhead. He'd beaten her submission by 48 hours. She'd confronted him in their shared apartment, still believing there was an explanation, some terrible mistake. "Caspian, they're saying you stole my designs. Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't." His face had gone cold, aristocratic features rearranging into something cruel. "Stole? Idra, we collaborated. You're confused." "We didn't collaborate. Those are my blueprints, my measurements, my—" "Your word against mine, sweetheart." He'd started packing her things into garbage bags with methodical calm. "And who do you think they'll believe? The Thorn family has built half of Milan's landmarks. You're a scholarship student with a foreign name and dead up to your eyeballs. You really think you can take me on?" She'd tried. God, she'd tried. But Caspian had been right about one thing. His family's name carried weight hers never could. The committee had ruled in his favor. Her professors had stopped returning her calls. Within a month, she'd lost her university position, her apartment, her credibility. Caspian had taken everything and left her with 20 euros in psychological wounds that had taken years to heal. Idra shook herself back to the present as she reached the grand staircase, Osiris a shadow at her 6. She was not that woman anymore. She was not powerless. She was not— "Idra!" The voice froze her blood. She turned slowly, already knowing who she'd see. Caspian Thorn stood 10 feet away, older now, 35 and fighting it with expensive grooming and a suit that screamed desperate relevance. Beside him, a willowy blonde in Chanel gripped his arm with the territorial possession of new money trying to buy into old. Caspian's eyes widened, scanning her from her handmade Italian boots to her Moretti diamond studs, clearly calculating, clearly confused by the transformation before him. "My God, you're—" He stopped, his face shifting through shock to disdain. "Still in Milan? I thought you'd crawled back to whatever—" "Signor Thorn," Osiris cut in, his voice a velvet threat. "You're addressing Signora Moretti." Caspian blinked. "Moretti? You married?" The blonde's eyes narrowed. "Caspian, who is this woman?" Idra felt the weight of her platinum wedding band beneath her glove, felt the power of the name she now carried. She should walk away. She should be gracious. She should be the bigger person. But something ugly and vindicated twisted in her chest. "Hello, Caspian," she said softly. Still stealing other people's work, or have you developed actual talent? His face flushed crimson. The blonde's grip loosened on his arm, sensing blood in the water. And that's when Caspian made his fatal mistake. He stepped forward, his voice dropping to that gaslighting whisper she remembered too well. Listen, Idra, I don't know what fantasy you're living, but showing up here dressed like you're somebody. His hand reached for her arm. Osiris moved like lightning, but he was a half-second too late. Because Idra had instinctively stepped back, her heel catching on the marble edge, and Caspian, whether from malice or momentum, didn't stop his forward motion. His handmade shoe connected with her ribs with sickening force. And as Idra hit the ground, the last thing she saw was Osiris's hand diving for his phone, his face gone white with terror. Because there was only one person he'd call with that expression. And Venezio Moretti did not forgive. The marble was cold against Idra's cheek. Colder than anything she'd felt since those nights in her car 5 years ago. For a moment, time fractured. She was 26 again, homeless and broken, watching Caspian's taillights disappear into Milan's wealthy districts while she had nowhere to go. The taste of copper filled her mouth where her teeth had cut her lip, and distantly she heard glass shattering from a nearby boutique window display. Jesus Christ, Caspian, what did you do? The blonde's voice was shrill, performatively horrified in the way of people who'd never actually witnessed violence. Idra's vision swam as she tried to push herself up, her wrist screaming where it had scraped against the Renaissance-era tile. Through the pain, she heard Caspian's voice. Smooth, practiced, the same tone he'd used to gaslight her into thinking she was crazy for accusing him of theft. She walked right into me, Allegra. You saw it. He crouched down, but there was no concern in his, but there was, eyes only calculation. Idra, I think you've had too much to drink. Let me call someone to take you to a shelter. There are programs for women like you. Women like me? Idra's voice came out raw. Well, clearly you're still struggling. His hand gestured vaguely at her, as if her current position on the ground erased the Valentino coat, the handcrafted boots, the discreet platinum band hidden beneath her leather glove. I should have known you'd resurface eventually, looking for a handout. That's what this is, isn't it? You saw me here and thought you could... Caspian, we're going to be late for the luncheon. Allegra cut in, her discomfort palpable. The crowd that had gathered was growing, phones materializing to capture the scene. Bad optics. Just, let's go. But Caspian wasn't done. Idra could see it in his eyes, that same sadistic satisfaction he'd worn when he'd packed her belongings into trash bags, when he'd systematically destroyed her reputation, when he'd stolen her future and convinced everyone she'd given it willingly. He'd never gotten closure from her disappearance. She'd simply vanished one night, and men like Caspian needed their victims to stay broken. He stood, straightening his Tom Ford suit, and looked down at her with theatrical disgust. You know what, Idra? I did you a favor 5 years ago. You were never going to make it as an architect. You didn't have the connections, the pedigree, the vision. I took your juvenile sketches and turned them into something the Giovanni Prize Committee could actually respect. You should be thanking me. Something in Idra's chest cracked open, not from pain but from the sheer audacity of his revision. Juvenile sketches. Her 3 years of research, of sustainable design innovations, of mathematical precision reduced to something he'd generously improved. Get up and get out, Idra, Caspian said, his voice rising, playing to the crowd now. Your kind doesn't belong on these tiles. This plaza was built by people who actually contribute to society, not failed scholarship cases who... He punctuated his words with a gesture, his Italian leather shoe swinging forward to emphasize his point, to shoo her away like a stray dog. But the kick landed. Not with full force, not intentional perhaps, but enough. His shoe connected with her already bruised ribs, sending fresh agony radiating through her torso. Idra gasped, her hand instinctively clutching her side, and the sound that escaped her was small and hurt and too familiar. The plaza went silent. Allegra's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God." "I barely touched her, she's being dramatic," Caspian said quickly, but his face had gone pale. Even he seemed shocked by what had just happened, as if his own cruelty had startled him. Idra looked up at him through tears she refused to let fall, and for one crystalline moment, she saw herself through his eyes, still nothing, still that girl he'd destroyed, still powerless. Except she wasn't. Osiris had moved through the crowd like an apex predator, his phone already to his ear, his free hand hovering near his weapon. The expression on his face was pure terror, and that's when Idra understood. Osiris wasn't afraid of Caspian. He was afraid of what was about to happen when Venezio found out. "Signora," Osiris said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, "I have Don Moretti on the line." Caspian frowned. Don Moretti? What kind of performance? But then he saw it. The way the crowd had started to back away. The way 3 men in dark suits had materialized at the plaza's exits. The way a black Mercedes SUV had pulled up to the curb, blocking traffic, its occupants emerging with the coordinated precision of a military unit. The Sentinels. Allegra's grip tightened on Caspian's arm. "Caspian, what's happening? Who are these people?" Idra's clutch had fallen open when she hit the ground, her phone lying on the marble tiles. It was ringing, Venezio's name flashing. Across the screen, the photo she'd taken of him that morning. Shirtless, smiling, dangerous and devastating, and hers. She reached for it with trembling fingers, accepting the call, and Venezio's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Idra, amore mio, are you hurt?" She could hear it, the lethal calm, the absolute control that meant someone was about to die. Not metaphorically. Actually die. "Vane," she whispered, "where did he touch you?" Caspian's face had gone from pale to ashen. He was looking at the phone, at the Sentinels now forming a perimeter around the plaza, at Osiris's hand resting on the gun beneath his jacket. The pieces were clicking together too slowly, his privilege making him stupid. Who the hell do you think you are?" Caspian demanded, but his voice cracked. Idra pulled herself to sitting, her ribs screaming, her mouth bloody, and looked at the man who'd stolen everything from her. The man who'd kicked her like trash, the man who still thought she was nothing. She pressed the phone to her ear and said clearly, loudly enough for Caspian to hear, "I'm okay, mio re, just a little bruised," and watched comprehension finally dawn on Caspian Thorn's face. Venezio's voice came through the speaker, velvet wrapped around razors. "Keep him there. I'm 8 minutes away." The line went dead. Allegra pulled her hand from Caspian's arm like he'd burned her. "Moretti?" Her voice climbed to a register reserved for true panic. "You just assaulted the wife of Venezio Moretti?" Caspian's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound came out, because there was nothing left to say. The demon was coming, and he'd already sent his wolves ahead. Osiris Valli had been Venezio Moretti's right hand for 12 years, and in that time, he'd orchestrated 17 territory acquisitions, neutralized 23 threats to the Moretti Empire, and personally disposed of 9 men who'd made the fatal mistake of disrespecting the family name. He'd done all of this with the cold efficiency of a surgeon and the moral flexibility of a mercenary. But he'd never been afraid. Not until 3 years ago, when Venezio had walked into the morning briefing with a woman on his arm and said, "This is Idra, she's mine. If anything happens to her, I will hold each of you personally responsible before I kill myself." Osiris had understood then that his job description had fundamentally changed. He was no longer protecting a man who couldn't be killed. He was protecting the only thing that could destroy him. And he just failed. "Seal the plaza," Osiris said into his radio, his voice devoid of emotion even as his pulse hammered against his temples. "Full perimeter. No one leaves. Authorization Moretti 1. The response was immediate. Marco and Dante emerged from the backup sedan, their movements synchronized, practiced. Within 30 seconds, black-suited sentinels materialized at every exit of the Loggia dei Mercanti. 8 men total, their presence transforming the historic plaza from public space to private prison. Tourists and shoppers froze mid-step, the atmosphere shifting from curiosity to primal fear. These weren't security guards, these were predators, and everyone present had just become potential prey. Osiris moved to Idra's side, his body angling to shield her from Caspian even as he assessed her injuries with clinical precision. Split lip, bruised ribs possibly cracked, scraped wrist, shock setting in around the eyes, survivable. But Venezio wouldn't care about survivable. He'd care about the violation. "Signora Moretti, can you stand?" Osiris extended his hand, his voice gentle in a way reserved only for her. Idra nodded, accepting his help. She was trembling, not from fear, he noted, but from adrenaline crash. Her fingers were still wrapped around her phone, knuckles white, as if holding onto Venezio's voice even after the call had ended. Caspian had backed up 3 steps, his expensive shoes squeaking against marble. "This is insane. You can't lock down a public plaza. I'll call the police. "Please do," Osiris said mildly. "Commissioner Ricci is a personal friend of Don Moretti. I'm sure he'd be fascinated to hear how you assaulted the Don's wife." Allegra de Fiore had gone corpse pale, her Chanel clutch trembling in her grip. The de Fiore family was old money, textile empire money. The kind of wealth that bought politicians in silence. Which meant Allegra knew exactly who the Morettis were, knew what they controlled, knew that standing next to Caspian Thorn right now was social and potentially literal suicide. "I didn't know," Allegra whispered more to herself than anyone else. "Caspian, you said she was nobody. You said—" "Shut up, Allegra," Caspian hissed, his composure finally cracking. Sweat beaded his hairline despite the cool morning air. His eyes darted between the sentinels, calculating exits that no longer existed. "This is a misunderstanding. I didn't assault anyone. She fell, and I was trying to—" "Do not," Osiris said, his voice dropping to a register that made Allegra whimper. "Insult our intelligence by lying." Marco approached from the left, Dante from the right, their movements casual but coordinated. The crowd had pressed back against the boutique windows, creating a clear circle around the central drama. Phone cameras were raised, but Osiris knew the footage would never see daylight. The Moretti family had people embedded in every social media company, every news outlet, every digital platform that mattered in Milan. This moment would be recorded only in memory and consequence. "Signora," Dante said quietly, producing a first aid kit from his jacket. "If you'll permit me." Idra nodded, letting Dante examine her wrist while Osiris maintained his position between her and Caspian. She was breathing too fast, her pupils dilated, and Osiris recognized the signs of someone whose trauma had been violently excavated. He'd read her file when Venezio had first brought her into the family, knew about the stolen blueprints, the gaslighting, the systematic destruction of her career and confidence. Knew that the man responsible was standing 15 feet away, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. "How long?" Idra asked, her voice steadier now. Osiris checked his watch. 6 minutes, Signora." Caspian's head snapped up. 6 minutes until what? No one answered him. They didn't need to. The sentinels had shifted position, no longer guarding exits but forming a tightening circle around their target. It was subtle. A half step here, an angle adjustment there, but the message was clear. Caspian Thorn wasn't leaving. Not vertically, anyway. "This is kidnapping," Caspian said, his voice climbing toward hysteria. "False imprisonment. I have rights. My family has connections. My father sits on the City Planning Commission, and my uncle is—" "Your uncle is Councilman Theodore Thorn," Osiris interrupted calmly, "who currently owes Don Moretti 3 million euros in gambling debts. Would you like me to continue listing your family's obligations to our organization, or would you prefer to save your breath?" The color drained from Caspian's face so completely he looked like a marble statue himself. Allegra made a small, broken sound and stepped away from him, her Louboutin heels clicking against the tiles as she put distance between herself and the condemned man. "I have nothing to do with this," she announced to the air, to the sentinels, to God. "Caspian and I aren't engaged. We're just dating, casually. As of this moment, we're nothing. Allegra, you can't—" Caspian reached for her, desperation making him stupid. Marco intercepted his hand with effortless precision, his grip just tight enough to communicate a warning. "I wouldn't, Signor Thorn." The sound of engines cut through the plaza's tense silence. Not one vehicle. 4. Black Mercedes SUVs with tinted windows and plates that belonged to no official registry, moving in formation like a funeral procession. The lead vehicle stopped directly in front of the plaza's main entrance, blocking it completely. The door opened, and Venezio Moretti stepped out. He was dressed in all black, tailored slacks, cashmere sweater, leather jacket that probably cost more than Caspian's car. His silver-threaded hair was perfectly styled, his face carefully blank in the way of men who'd learned to weaponize their composure. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd never feared anything except losing what he loved. His eyes found Idra immediately, scanning her from head to toe, cataloging every injury with the precision of someone who'd memorized every inch of her. Something flickered across his face, relief, rage, devastation, before it smoothed back to marble. Then those dark eyes shifted to Caspian Thorn, and the temperature in the plaza dropped 10 degrees. Venezio didn't speak, didn't need to. He simply looked at the man who'd touched his wife, and everyone present understood they were witnessing the moment before an execution. Osiris stepped back, giving his Don clear line of sight. Caspian opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Listen, there's been a mistake. I didn't know she was—" Venezio raised one hand. Caspian's voice cut off like someone had severed his vocal cords. The silence that followed was absolute, and then Venezio smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Osiris had ever seen. Venezio Moretti had killed his first man at 17. A Russian enforcer who'd tried to muscle in on his father's territory. He'd done it with a broken bottle and no witnesses, and he'd never lost sleep over it. By 25, he'd consolidated 3 rival families under the Moretti banner through a combination of strategic marriages, calculated violence, and the kind of psychological warfare that left men begging for physical torture instead. He'd built an empire on fear and respect in equal measure. But standing in the Loggia dei Mercanti, looking at his wife's split lip and the way she cradled her ribs, Venezio felt something he hadn't experienced in 26 years. Helplessness. And helplessness on a man like him transmuted instantly into fury so cold it could stop hearts. He crossed the plaza with measured steps, his leather shoes clicking against marble with the rhythm of a ticking clock. The crowd parted like a biblical sea, people pressing themselves against boutique, windows and Renaissance columns to escape his path. He didn't acknowledge them. His entire universe had contracted to the 3-meter radius containing his wife and the man who'd hurt her. Osiris moved aside wordlessly, and Venezio crouched beside Idra with the kind of gentleness that seemed impossible from a man his size. His hands, scarred, deadly capable of such violence, cupped her face like she was made of spun glass. "Amore mio," he whispered, his voice for her alone. "Let me see." Idra's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her jaw was set with that stubborn pride he loved and feared in equal measure. "I'm okay, Vane. It's not. Let me see." She relented, letting him tilt her head to examine her split lip, letting him touch the bruise already blooming along her ribs with fingers that shook imperceptibly. Venezio catalogued each injury with the precision of someone planning a masterpiece of retribution. "Who?" he asked simply. Idra's gaze flicked past him to where Caspian stood frozen, and that was all Venezio needed. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, tender, reverent, a benediction before the massacre, and stood, turning to face the man who'd signed his own death warrant. Venezio said nothing. He simply looked at Caspian Thorn with the kind of attention usually reserved for examining insects under glass. 30 seconds passed, then 40. The silence stretched like a torture device, and Caspian began to sweat in earnest, his expensive suit darkening at the collar. It was an accident," Caspian stammered. "She walked into me and I lost my balance and—" Venezio raised one finger. Caspian's mouth snapped shut so hard his teeth clicked together. "Osiris," Venezio said calmly, conversationally, as if discussing lunch plans. "What did you witness?" "Signor Thorn verbally accosted Signora Moretti," Osiris recited with courtroom precision. "When she responded, he made physical contact, resulting in her falling and sustaining injuries. He then kicked her while she was on the ground. I barely touched—" "Marco," Venezio continued, his voice never rising above that terrifying calm. "What did the security footage show?" Marco pulled out a tablet, queuing up video that the Moretti family's cyber team had already extracted from the Plaza's security system. The footage played in damning clarity, Caspian's shoe connecting with Idra's ribs, her small gasp of pain, the way she'd clutched her side. Venezio watched it once, twice, 3 times, his expression never changing. Then he handed the tablet back to Marco and finally spoke to Caspian directly. "What's your name?" "See Caspian Thorn." "Caspian Thorn," Venezio repeated, tasting the name like wine he was about to spit out. "And what do you do, Caspian Thorn?" "I'm an architect. I run Thorn Design Solutions. My family has been in Milan for 4 generations, and if you think you can—" "An architect!" Venezio's smile was surgical. "Fascinating. Tell me, Caspian, do you know who my wife is?" Caspian's eyes darted to Idra, confusion and dawning horror warring on his face. She was nobody, just a girl I knew years ago. She had nothing, she was nothing. I don't understand how she—" "Look at her," Venezio commanded, his voice dropping to a register that made several onlookers take involuntary steps backward. "Look at the woman you just kicked like trash and tell me what you see." Caspian looked, really looked. And Venezio watched the pieces click together with agonizing slowness. The Valentino coat, the handmade boots, the platinum band on her finger, the way the sentinels had positioned themselves protectively around her, the way Venezio Moretti himself had crossed the plaza to touch her face like she was his reason for breathing. "That's Idra Solange," Venezio said softly, dangerously. "The most brilliant architect in Italy. The woman who redesigned my entire property portfolio, whose sustainable housing project is being studied by universities across Europe, who was featured in Architectural Digest last month as one of the top innovators under 35. He took a step closer to Caspian, invading his space with predatory intent. "She's also the woman you stole from 5 years ago. The woman whose blueprints you photographed and submitted as your own work. The woman you gaslit into homelessness while you accepted awards for her genius." Caspian's face went from white to green. How do you... I know everything about everyone who's ever hurt her, Venezio said, his voice almost gentle. I know about the Giovanni Prize. I know about the university committee that ruled in your favor because your family donated a wing to their campus. I know you've been coasting on her work for 5 years, winning contracts based on designs you couldn't replicate if your life depended on it. He leaned in close enough that only Caspian could hear his next words. And it does depend on it. Caspian stumbled backward, but Marco and Dante had materialized behind him, human walls preventing escape. You can't do this. I have rights. I'll go to the police. The police? Venezio straightened, his voice returning to conversational volume. By all means. Call them. Call your lawyer, call your father, your uncle, call God himself if you think it will help. He gestured broadly at the plaza, at the sentinels standing guard, at the black SUVs that had transformed the historic space into something out of a crime thriller. But understand this, Caspian Thorn. The woman you kicked, the beggar you told to crawl back to her gutter, owns 43% of the commercial real estate in this district, including the building you're standing in front of, the building where your office lease comes up for renewal next month. Venezio pulled out his phone, made a show of checking something, then looked back at Caspian with that terrible, gentle smile. Actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke. You don't have an office anymore. I just had it terminated, effective immediately. Caspian's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again, the sound of his life unraveling in real time. Now, Venezio said, clasping his hands behind his back like a professor about to deliver a lecture. Let's discuss what happens when you touch what belongs to me. And that's when the real screaming started. The screaming wasn't literal, not yet, but Caspian Thorn's phone had become an instrument of torture, buzzing with the relentless rhythm of a life collapsing in digital real time. Email notifications, text messages, automated alerts from banking apps. Each vibration was another brick pulled from the foundation of his carefully constructed existence. Idra watched from where she stood beside Osiris, her ribs still aching, her lips still bleeding, but something else rising in her chest now. Not satisfaction exactly, something cleaner, something that tasted like justice. Venezio hadn't moved, his hands still clasped behind his back, his expression one of mild academic interest as Caspian fumbled with his phone. The man's fingers shook so badly he nearly dropped it twice before managing to open his email. What did you do? Caspian's voice cracked on the last word. What the hell did you do? I did nothing, Venezio said with the casual honesty of someone stating the time. I simply made a phone call to Signora Alberti at Castellani Holdings. You know her, yes? The woman you were supposed to meet with today to finalize your lease agreement for the Via Monte Napoleone property? Caspian's face went from green to gray. I informed her that Thorn Design Solutions is currently under investigation for intellectual property theft and fraud. I also mentioned that your firm's insurance policy has been canceled, your business license is being reviewed for irregularities, and most importantly that your primary client, the Rossini Group, has terminated their contract effective immediately. That's impossible, Caspian whispered. The Rossini project is locked in for 3 years. You signed a contract that included a morality clause, Idra said, her voice cutting across the plaza like a blade. All eyes turned to her. She stepped forward, shrugging off Osiris's protective hover, and suddenly the plaza wasn't Venezio's stage anymore. It was hers. Idra reached into her portfolio, the one she'd been carrying when Caspian had kicked her, and pulled out a legal document bound in leather. The Castellani contract, the one that was supposed to make her reputation as an independent architect, free from the Moretti shadow. She looked at Caspian, really looked at him, and saw not the monster who'd destroyed her, but a small, weak man who'd built his entire identity on stolen brilliance because he'd never had any of his own. "The Via Montenapoleone building," Idra said clearly, projecting so the remaining crowd could hear. "The one you've been trying to lease for your new headquarters. The 3-story Renaissance palazzo with the original frescoes and the rooftop terrace you've been bragging about to your clients." Caspian's eyes widened. "How do you—" "I bought it 6 months ago," Idra continued, her voice steady despite the pain radiating through her torso. "Through a shell company. Cash purchase. 42 million euros. She walked toward him, and Marco and Dante shifted to let her pass, wolves making way for their queen. "I've been renovating it, restoring the original architectural details that decades of neglect had damaged. It's actually beautiful work, the kind of project that requires real vision, real understanding of historical preservation balanced with modern functionality." Idra stopped 3 feet from Caspian, close enough to see the sweat beading his upper lip. "The kind of work you could never do because you don't actually know how to design buildings, Caspian. You only know how to steal from people who can." "This is insane," Allegra breathed from somewhere behind them. "Caspian, you said you designed the Riverside Cultural Center. You have the award in your office." "I've seen it." Idra turned to the blonde, whose Chanel suit suddenly looked like costume jewelry on someone playing dress-up in her mother's closet. "He did win the award. For my designs I spent 3 years developing while working 2 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night. Designs he photographed while I was in the bathroom at a cafe, then submitted under his name 48 hours before my deadline." She pulled another document from her portfolio, this one yellowed with age, covered in her own handwriting and technical drawings. Her original blueprints, the ones she'd thought were lost forever. "I kept photographs," Idra said simply, "because I was proud of them, because they represented everything I'd worked for, because some part of me knew I'd need proof someday." She held them up next to her phone, where she'd pulled up images of the completed Riverside Cultural Center, the building that had launched Caspian's career and destroyed hers. The match was perfect, undeniable. Allegra made a small, wounded sound and took another step away from Caspian. "You told me you designed that. You said—" "He says a lot of things," Idra interrupted. "Most of them are lies. Some of them are stolen truths." She turned back to Caspian, and this moment was what she'd needed. Not Venezio's violence, not the Moretti family's power. Just this, standing in front of the man who'd broken her, whole and brilliant and undeniable. "The Castellani contract you were so desperate to pitch." Idra pulled one final document from her portfolio. "It's already been awarded. To Solange Architecture, my firm. The one I built from nothing after you tried to destroy me." She held up the signed agreement, let him see the Castellani family seal, the signatures, the scope of work that would cement her reputation independent of her married name. "And the Via Montenapoleone building you wanted so badly?" Idra's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "I'm converting it into affordable housing for women rebuilding their lives, artists, architects, dreamers who've been told they're nothing by men like you." Caspian's phone buzzed again, and again, the digital execution continuing in his pocket. "You can't do this," he said, but there was no conviction left in his voice. "My family, your family," Venezio interjected smoothly, "is currently in a meeting with my financial advisors. Your father's construction company has several outstanding loans with banks I control. Your uncle's gambling debts I've already mentioned. Your cousin's nightclub in Navigli uses Moretti security. Would you like me to continue?" Idra reached for the leather portfolio Caspian was clutching, the one containing his desperate pitch to Castellani Holdings, and he was too shocked to resist when she took it. She opened it, glanced at the designs inside, and actually laughed. "These are mine too," she said, holding up renderings that she recognized from her graduate thesis. "Modified slightly, but fundamentally mine. You've been recycling my work for 5 years and praying no one would notice." She pulled the pages out one by one and then, with deliberate ceremony, tore them in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the plaza like thunder. Allegra watched with undisguised horror as Idra shredded Caspian's entire portfolio, letting the pieces fall like snow around his expensive shoes. "The woman you kicked," Idra said softly, dangerously, "isn't a beggar, Caspian. She's the architect who's going to be designing half of Milan's skyline in the next decade. She's the woman whose name will be in textbooks while yours is forgotten." She stepped back, her point made, her dignity reclaimed. "And she's done letting you steal from her." Venezio moved to her side, his hand finding the small of her back in wordless support. But he didn't take over. This was her moment, her victory. Caspian stood in a circle of torn paper, his phone still buzzing its death knell, his fiancée edging toward the exit, his entire world reduced to rubble. And that's when Idra's phone rang, the personal line that only 3 people had access to. She answered, listening for a moment, then looked at Caspian with something almost like pity. "That was the Giovanni Prize Committee," she said. "They're reopening their investigation into the 2020 submissions, with new evidence. Evidence that will lead to your award being revoked and criminal charges being filed for academic fraud." Venezio leaned close to Caspian, his voice dropping to that terrible whisper. "And that's just what we're doing publicly." The fall of empires, Idra had learned in her architectural history courses, happened in 2 ways. Slowly, through centuries of erosion and neglect, or instantaneously, through a single catastrophic failure point. The Roman aqueducts had crumbled over generations. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge had torn itself apart in 40 minutes. Caspian Thorne's life was collapsing at a rate somewhere between the two. His phone had stopped buzzing, not because the notifications had ceased, but because the device had finally given up under the sheer volume of incoming disaster. The screen was frozen on his banking app, displaying a message in stark red letters. "Account restricted. Contact your branch immediately." "What does that mean?" Caspian's voice had gone hollow, distant, the voice of someone watching their execution from outside their own body. "Restricted? That's my operating account. I have payroll coming up. I have—" His phone suddenly lit up with an incoming call. The screen read, "Father." Caspian's hand trembled as he answered, putting it on speaker with the desperate instinct of someone hoping witnesses might save him. "Dad, something's wrong with my accounts. I think there's been a mistake." "There's no mistake, you goddamn fool." His father's voice came through like a whip crack, decades of old money refinement stripped away to reveal pure fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have even the slightest comprehension of the shitstorm you've created? I don't know what you're talking about. You assaulted Venezio Moretti's wife." The words came out as a roar. "In public, on camera. The wife of the man who controls half the development contracts in northern Italy. The man whose approval we need for the Porta Nuova expansion." Caspian's face had gone the color of old snow. "I didn't know who she was. She looked like—" "I don't care what she looked like. I just got off the phone with our bank. Every line of credit we have frozen, every loan called in for immediate repayment. 47 million euros, Caspian. Due in 30 days, or they'll start seizing assets." The phone speakers crackled with his father's barely controlled rage. "And do you know who sits on the board of our bank? Do you know who personally approved our last loan extension? Venezio Moretti's brother-in-law." Caspian's legs buckled. He would have fallen if Marco hadn't caught him with casual efficiency, propping him up like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Venezio watched this with the detached interest of someone observing a fascinating chemical reaction. He'd orchestrated this symphony of destruction from his car during the 8-minute drive to the Plaza. A phone call here, a text message there, pulling threads in the complex web of Milan's power structure until Caspian's entire world unraveled. The Rossini contract was the foundation of everything, Caspian's father continued, his voice breaking. 70% of our revenue, and they just sent termination papers. With cause, which means they're not paying the cancellation fee. Dad, please, I can fix this. You can't fix anything. You never could. I've been cleaning up your messes for 35 years, and this is the one I can't buy my way out of. The line went dead. Caspian stood there holding his silent phone like it might somehow reverse time if he stared at it long enough. Around him, the remaining crowd watched with the morbid fascination usually reserved for car crashes and public executions. Allegra had been edging toward the sentinels guarding the nearest exit, her Chanel clutch held defensively across her chest. But now she stopped, pulled out her own phone and made a call with shaking fingers. Mother? Yes, it's me. I need you to issue a statement. No, right now. I need the family to publicly confirm that I am not, nor have I ever been engaged to Caspian Thorn. We were casually dating, emphasis on were, past tense. She listened for a moment, her face hardening. Because he just committed social and possibly actual suicide, and I will not let the De Fiore name go down with him. Another pause. I don't care what it looks like. Do it now or I'm flying to New York tonight and you'll never get me back for the winter gala. Allegra ended the call and turned to face Caspian, her expression carefully composed into something between pity and disgust. I'm sorry, she said, though her tone suggested she was anything but. But you understand I have to protect my family's interests. This has been educational. She slipped off the promise ring Caspian had given her 3 months ago. Not quite an engagement, he'd said, but a commitment to their future, and held it out to him. When he didn't move to take it, she simply dropped it. The small diamond clinked against marble and rolled toward a drainage grate, coming to rest near Idra's torn boot where blood had dried on the leather. Allegra, you can't. We had plans. The spring wedding. Your parents already put down the deposit at Villa Balbiano. There is no spring wedding, Allegra said, her voice sharp enough to cut. There is no us. Frankly, Caspian, I'm not even sure there ever was. You're a fraud who's been coasting on someone else's talent, and I refuse to be collateral damage when your house of cards finishes collapsing. She looked at Idra then, and something like respect flickered across her carefully maintained features. Signora Moretti, I apologize for my association with this man. I genuinely didn't know about any of this. Idra nodded slightly, recognizing the calculated self-preservation of someone who'd grown up in a world where loyalty was always conditional, and survival meant knowing when to abandon a sinking ship. Allegra turned to the nearest sentinel. May I leave? Venezio made a small gesture, and the exit cleared. Allegra walked out of the plaza with her head high and her phone already out, no doubt crafting the social media narrative that would distance her from Caspian's impending ruin. Caspian watched her go with the blank expression of someone whose capacity for shock had been completely exhausted. My office is gone, he said to no one in particular. My clients are gone. My bank accounts are frozen. My fiancé just dumped me on camera. My family is cutting me off. He looked at Venezio with something almost like curiosity, the way a man might look at the gun that's about to end his life. What else is there? What else could you possibly take from me? Venezio's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Everything, he said simply. But I'm not the one taking it. He gestured toward Idra, who stood straight back despite her injuries, her torn coat somehow making her look more regal rather than diminished. She is. And unlike you, when she takes something, she's earned the right. Caspian's phone buzzed one final time. A notification from the Italian Revenue Agency. A full audit of his personal and business finances, initiated by an anonymous tip regarding unreported income and fraudulent expense claims. The noise that escaped Caspian's throat wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. "You're destroying me." "No," Idra said quietly. "You destroyed yourself 5 years ago when you chose theft over integrity. We're just making sure everyone else knows what you really are." Venezio checked his watch with theatrical precision. "Osiris, what's the current status of Thorn Design Solutions?" Osiris consulted his tablet. "Business license suspended pending investigation. Website hosting account terminated for non-payment. I may have accelerated that billing cycle. Office building has initiated eviction proceedings. As of 8 minutes ago, Google searches for Caspian Thorn now auto-complete with fraud and plagiarism." He looked up with a grim smile. "The internet is forever, Signor Thorn, and it's no longer your friend." Caspian swayed on his feet, and this time Marco let him drop to his knees on the same marble tiles where he'd kicked Idra less than 30 minutes ago. "Please," Caspian whispered, looking up at Venezio with desperate eyes. "What do you want? Money? I'll get it somehow. An apology? I'll apologize. I'll do anything, just—" "Now you want to negotiate," Venezio observed coldly. "Now that you're on your knees. How interesting." He crouched down to Caspian's level, invading his space the way predators do when they want prey to understand the futility of escape. "But the time for negotiations ended the moment your shoe touched my wife's skin." Venezio stood, adjusted his jacket, and turned to Idra with an expression that transformed from ice to warmth so quickly it was like watching two different men occupy the same body. "Amore, are you ready to finish this?" And Idra, understanding exactly what he meant, nodded once. Because the real punishment wasn't what they'd taken from Caspian. It was what she was about to give him. Venezio's hand found the small of Idra's back, a question in the gentle pressure of his fingers. She leaned into him briefly, drawing strength, not permission, before straightening and nodding toward the sentinels. "Give us the Plaza," she said quietly. "Just for 5 minutes." Venezio's jaw tightened, every protective instinct warring with his respect for her autonomy. "Idra, I need to do this alone, Vane. You've dismantled his empire. Let me reclaim my dignity." Something passed between them in that look, an entire conversation conducted in the language of married intimacy. Finally, Venezio nodded once, sharp and reluctant. 5 minutes, he said. "Osiris stays within sight." He turned to Caspian with a smile that promised unspeakable consequences. "If you so much as breathe in her direction with anything other than respect, what I've done to your career will seem merciful compared to what I'll do to your body. Am I understood?" Caspian, still on his knees, could only nod. Venezio pressed a kiss to Idra's temple, lingering, possessive, a promise, before walking toward the plaza's edge where his sentinels waited. The remaining crowd had been cleared, leaving only Marco and Dante stationed at distant corners, close enough to intervene but far enough to grant the illusion of privacy. Idra stood over Caspian for a long moment, studying the man who'd haunted her nightmares for 5 years. He looked smaller than she remembered, weaker. The aristocratic features she'd once found handsome now just seemed pinched, entitled, the face of someone who'd never built anything real because he'd never had to. "Stand up," she said. Caspian struggled to his feet, his expensive suit wrinkled, his carefully styled hair falling across his forehead in sweaty strands. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Look at me," Idra commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd survived the worst he could do and emerged stronger. You owe me that much. He looked up and she saw it there, the dawning comprehension that he'd miscalculated catastrophically. Not just today. 5 years ago. You thought I was nothing, Idra said, her voice steady despite the pain radiating through her ribs. When you stole my blueprints, when you gaslit me into questioning my own sanity, when you packed my life into trash bags and left me with 20 euros and nowhere to go, you thought you'd won. You thought you'd eliminated the competition. Caspian opened his mouth, but she held up one hand. I'm not finished. You don't get to speak yet. You spent 5 years speaking over me, for me instead of me. Now you listen. She took a step closer, and he instinctively flinched. I want you to understand something, Caspian. The reason you're on your knees right now isn't because of Venezio. Yes, he loves me. Yes, he has power. Yes, he used that power to dismantle your life. But the real reason you're destroyed is simpler than that. Idra pulled out her phone, pulled up her architectural portfolio, the one she'd built over 3 years of 16-hour days and scholarship to survival and back again. You were never better than me. You were never smarter, never more talented, never more visionary. The only advantage you ever had was that you were willing to steal, and I wasn't willing to believe someone I loved could betray me that completely. She swiped through images of her completed projects. The sustainable housing development in Bergamo, the cultural center in Turin, the adaptive reuse project that had won her international recognition. Every single one of these I designed myself. No theft, no shortcuts, just work. The kind of work you've never done because you've never had to. Your family's money bought you opportunities and you squandered them by taking the easy path. Caspian's face had gone from white to red, shame and anger fighting for dominance. You don't understand what it's like, he said, his voice hoarse. Growing up with a father, like mine, with expectations. No, Idra cut him off sharply. You don't get to do that. You don't get to make yourself the victim of your own cruelty. I grew up with nothing, Caspian. No family money, no connections, no safety net. I built myself from scratch twice, once before you destroyed me, once after. She stepped closer still, close enough that he could see the split in her lip, the bruise blooming along her jaw. And the second time I built myself into something you could never touch. Not because I married well, though I did. Not because I got lucky, though I'm grateful every day for what I have. But because I'm actually good at what I do. Because my designs are brilliant. Because I deserve every success I've earned. Tears were streaming down Caspian's face now, and Idra felt nothing watching them fall. Not satisfaction, not pity, just the cool, clean emptiness of a debt finally paid. The Riverside Cultural Center, the building that launched your career, is being retrofitted right now, she said. And when they unveil the renovations next spring, there will be a plaque in the main atrium. It will say, Original design by Idra Solange 2020. Stolen by Caspian Thorn. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Caspian made a sound like he'd been gut-punched. The Giovanni Prize Committee is going to investigate, and they're going to find exactly what we both know they'll find. That every brilliant idea you claimed as yours was actually mine. Your award will be revoked. My name will be added to the permanent record, and every building you've designed since will be reviewed for authenticity. She paused, letting the full weight of that sink in. How many of them are actually yours, Caspian? How many designs have you created without stealing from me or someone else? One? None? His silence was answer enough. Here's what you never understood, Idra said, her voice softening into something almost like pity. Talent isn't something you can take. Vision isn't something you can steal. You can copy the lines, trace the blueprints, claim the credit. But you can't fake the creative spark that makes architecture art instead of just engineering. She thought of those nights in her car, sketching buildings on napkins with numb fingers, refusing to let poverty kill her dreams. Thought of meeting Venezio in the rain, how he'd looked at her drawings like they were scripture. Thought of the 3 years she'd spent rebuilding herself, designing buildings that would outlast her lifetime. I was always going to succeed, Caspian, with or without you, with or without your theft, with or without your sabotage, because I have something you'll never have. What's that? His voice was barely a whisper. Actual talent. The words hung in the air like a verdict, simple and devastating and absolutely true. Caspian crumpled then, not physically but spiritually. She watched something fundamental break behind his eyes, the final collapse of the ego that had sustained him through 5 years of fraud. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "and for what it's worth, It's worth nothing," Idra said flatly. "Your apology can't give me back the year I spent homeless, can't erase the panic attacks or the imposter syndrome or the nights I went hungry. Can't undo the damage you did to my reputation before I rebuilt it myself." She turned to walk away, then paused. "But I want you to live, Caspian. I want you to live a long life, working whatever job you can get with a ruined reputation. I want you to watch my buildings rise across Milan's skyline and know that every single one of them is something you could never create. I want you to see my name in textbooks and on awards and in history." Idra looked back at him one final time. "Because the best revenge isn't your destruction, it's my success, and you're going to have a front row seat to watch it for the rest of your mediocre life." She walked toward Venezio, who'd been watching from across the plaza with barely restrained tension. He met her halfway, his hands immediately cupping her face, checking her eyes for trauma. "Did you get what you needed?" he asked softly. "Yes," Idra said, and meant it. Behind them, Caspian remained kneeling on the marble, destroyed not by violence, but by truth. But as Venezio led Idra toward their car, Osiris's phone buzzed with an incoming message that made his face go carefully blank. He showed it to Venezio, whose expression darkened instantly, because Caspian Thorn had one last card to play, and he'd just decided to burn everything to the ground rather than accept defeat. 1 year later, the spring sun transformed Milan into liquid gold, painting the city's ancient spires and modern glass towers with equal reverence. Idra Solange Moretti stood at the entrance of the building that had once represented her greatest humiliation and now embodied her most profound triumph. The Via Monte Napoleone palazzo she'd bought 6 months before Caspian had kicked her in the Loggia dei Mercanti. The Renaissance facade had been meticulously restored, every fresco repaired by master craftsmen, every crack in the marble sealed with materials that honored the building's 400-year history. But inside, the palazzo had been transformed into something unprecedented, a fusion of historical preservation and radical contemporary purpose that architecture critics were already calling the future of adaptive reuse. The bronze plaque beside the massive wooden doors read, "The Solange Sanctuary, Empowering Women Through Design." Idra ran her fingers over the letters, still disbelieving that this was real. 18 months ago, she'd been on her knees in a public plaza, tasting blood and humiliation. Now she stood before 200 invited guests, journalists from Architectural Digest and Domus, city officials, and women whose lives would be changed by what she'd built. Venezio stood slightly behind her and to the left, close enough to provide support, far enough to make clear this was her moment, not his. He'd learned that balance over their 3 years of marriage. The dance between protection and respect, between love and autonomy. His hand rested lightly on her lower back, a tether and a blessing. "Nervous?" he murmured. Terrified, Idra admitted. What if they don't understand what I'm trying to do? Then they're idiots and their opinions don't matter. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But they will understand, Amore. How could they not? You've built something miraculous. The sanctuary wasn't just a shelter. It was a statement. The ground floor housed Solange Architecture's offices. A deliberate choice to place her successful firm as the foundation upon which everything else rose. The second and third floors contained 24 residential units for women rebuilding their lives. Artists, architects, entrepreneurs, refugees, domestic violence survivors. Each unit was a masterpiece of compact design, 800 square feet that felt like twice that, with workspace integrated seamlessly into living space. But it was the fourth floor that made critics weep. The rooftop level was entirely communal, a massive greenhouse and garden where residents could grow food, a workshop equipped with tools for woodworking and metalwork and textile arts, a library whose floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Milan's skyline, and a central courtyard with the original palazzo's fountain restored and flowing. Idra had designed it as a cathedral to female creativity, a space that said, "You are not charity cases, you are artists and visionaries who deserve beauty and dignity and tools to build your futures." Mayor Castellani approached, her silver hair styled immaculately, her smile genuine. "Signora Moretti, this is extraordinary. The city is honored to have supported this project." "The city tried to block my permits 3 times, Idra said with polite steel, "until my husband made some phone calls." Venezio's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Idra felt him tense slightly. They'd argued about that. His intervention, her independence, the impossible balance of being married to a man whose power could solve any problem but whose solutions sometimes felt like they undermined her agency. "Nevertheless," the mayor said, recovering smoothly, "what you've accomplished here will be studied for generations. And I understand you have other projects in development?" Idra smiled. 4 commissions across northern Italy, a museum in Verona, a mixed-use development in Turin, a university library in Bologna, and a private villa in Lake Garda, all secured on the merit of my designs, all paying market rate. She didn't mention that Venezio had carefully distanced himself from the negotiations, that he'd made clear to his network that Idra's work was to be judged independently. It had been his gift to her, the space to succeed or fail on her own terms. The press conference began at noon, held in the sanctuary's central courtyard where the restored fountain provided a soundtrack of falling water. Cameras flashed as Idra stood at the podium, her burgundy suit custom-tailored, her natural hair styled in an elegant twist. Every inch the successful architect she'd fought so hard to become. "The Solange Sanctuary exists because I know what it's like to have your dreams stolen," Idra began, her voice carrying across the courtyard. 5 years ago I was homeless in this city. My work had been plagiarized, my reputation destroyed, my future erased by someone who believed talent was something you could take rather than something you earned. The audience had gone silent, absorbed. I could have let that define me. I could have accepted that narrative, that I was a victim, that I was broken, that I would never recover, but I refused, and I had help refusing. She looked at Venezio, who stood at the back of the crowd, deliberately keeping distance. He nodded once, a private acknowledgement. "This building represents what's possible when we invest in women's potential rather than their trauma. Every resident here has been selected not because of what was done to them, but because of what they're capable of creating. They are artists, designers, writers, entrepreneurs, and they deserve space that honors their brilliance." Applause rippled through the courtyard. A journalist from La Repubblica raised her hand. Signora Moretti, there are rumors that Caspian Thorn, the architect who stole your original designs, tried to sabotage this project. Can you comment? Idra's smile was serene. Signor Thorn is no longer relevant to my narrative. But yes, he attempted to file complaints about permit irregularities, tried to convince investors to withdraw funding, and submitted anonymous reports to the Building Commission claiming structural violations. And every single claim was investigated and dismissed, because unlike his career, my work is built on a foundation of integrity. The sanctuary passed every inspection with perfect scores. She paused, then added with quiet satisfaction. I understand Signor Thorn is currently working as a junior draftsman for a small firm in Bergamo. I wish him well in his new career. The journalist grinned, recognizing the exquisite cruelty of that dismissal. As the press conference concluded and guests moved inside for tours, Osiris materialized at Venezio's elbow with his tablet. Don Moretti, you should see this. Venezio's face went carefully blank as he read, then looked up at Idra, who was laughing with a group of sanctuary residents, her joy incandescent. How bad? Venezio asked quietly. Thorn's been hospitalized. Attempted suicide. He left a note blaming Signora Moretti for destroying his life. Venezio's jaw tightened. Get ahead of it. I want our legal team prepared, and I want... Vain. Idra had appeared beside him, her architect's intuition reading his tension immediately. What's wrong? He hesitated, wanting to protect her from this, knowing he couldn't. Caspian, he said simply. Understanding flashed across her face, followed by something complex, not quite guilt, not quite satisfaction, something uncomfortably in between. Is he alive? Yes, but he's making this about you, about us. Idra looked back at the sanctuary, at the women laughing in the courtyard, at the building she'd created from pain and brilliance and stubborn refusal to stay broken. Let him, she said finally. Let him make it about me. Because this... She gestured at the palazzo, at her success, at everything she'd built. This is what happens when you try to destroy someone with actual talent. You don't kill them. You just give them a reason to rise higher than you ever could. She took Venezio's hand, squeezed once, and walked back to her guests. But as the celebration continued into the golden afternoon, Osiris received another message. Caspian Thorn had survived his suicide attempt, and he'd just given an interview to Corriere della Sera claiming that Idra Solange had used mafia connections to destroy an innocent man. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Okay, this story has come to an end. If it touched your heart in any way, leave a like and share it with someone who also enjoys emotional stories. New stories are coming soon. Until then, I'll be in the comments. Let's talk about this ending.